2009, and I just have to say thanks to Steve. You guys have got such an amazing person in terms of organization, in terms of reaching out to speakers. I want to thank Steve because he is just amazing. I do speak in various groups, and I have to tell you, nobody is as organized as Steve. It's just unbelievable to me because we actually got going on this, what, 16 months ago? It's been quite a while.
January 2012, I invited him out, and he said, how about I come in April of 2013?
Yeah, we worked it out.
And I said, fine, and we're at it. He actually showed up.
Yeah, I know, I remembered, he remembered. Of course, Chuck with the technology. Then I get to see some old friends like Angela that are here from the last time, and I'm going to make some new friends. Well, I hope you'll be my friend by the time I get done telling you about Russia. But we're going to have fun today, and that's my goal. Let me say in terms of the way I would like to proceed. I've got, I don't know, 57 slides. It's sort of ridiculous, although many are photo slides, and we're not going to linger over a lot of them. It's simply a matter that I do agree with the Chinese aphorism that, you know, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and I really want to bring to our thought a variety of matters involving Russia. And as you see from my title, I feel like we need to get real about Russia. I think there is so much misperception, misunderstanding about Russia, and so frankly today it may be, depending upon your knowledge base, your own experience, your life experience, living through the period of Soviet power, etc., that what I'm going to share will be a rather different take on Russia. And I'll tell you up front, among people in my business in the United States, I am at one end of the spectrum. Most people are quite pessimistic about what's happening in Russia. Most people, I'm talking about specialists who study Russia, Americans, are really quite negative about President Putin and where Russia's going. I'm going to offer an alternative view. I'll just tell you up front, because this is not going to be a lecture that is structured the way an Agatha Christie mystery is, where we have to wait till the last slide and the last moment to get to the punchline. I'm going to tell you up front where I'm going, and I've got some early slides in this regard. But I'm going to offer a much more upbeat assessment of Russia than I see in our media and in our general discussion. And I'll just tell you up front, I think the biggest reason why there is, in my mind, a disconnect between Russian reality and thinking in our country about Russia is the fact that in winning the Cold War, as we essentially did, I know some humorously say that Germany and Japan and Turkey won because of certain costs that we've had to bear. We did win in many ways. Russia imploded, the Soviet Union imploded. They had to readjust to the new realities of the world. They are a market economy. They have re-engaged the mainstream. Amazingly, Georgia, with whom Russia fought a war, what, just a little over 4 years ago, allowed them to join the World Trade Organization. Russia is fully engaged globally, economically. They are developing a new kind of political system. I'm going to call it a hybrid democracy. I am going to qualify it because there are problems with their political system. But one of my slides, I think it is buried later on, but I will share it with Angela, the comment, because I know she will be leaving, and I'll share it with you, is the following. And I have said this in many places. I just did a lecture at Oxford University a month ago. One of the reasons they invited me, from Tucson to go to Oxford was that I'm an unusual American in terms of my perspectives. And I had met somebody there, the director of the St. Anthony's College, and said, and I gave an interesting talk from his standpoint in Oslo, Norway. He said, we got to get you to Oxford because this is really an unusual angle from an American. We're used to you Americans coming and you're the most negative about Russia and everything. And so you're not. So, when I went there, again, it was a bit of a startling presentation to the roughly 90 people there. In any case, I made this comment, no one challenged it. No one's ever challenged me. Maybe somebody will today. Never in Russia's over 1,000-year history have Russians enjoyed as much personal freedom of maneuver as they do right now. Never. And Russians are happy about it. And their frame of reference is not the way we live, or the way people in Sweden and France live. It's the way they've lived. It's the same as you. Your frame of reference is life as you remember from your childhood, from when you started your career, when your children were born. That's your frame of reference, not the way things are in Japan or Sweden. And so from the Russian standpoint, things are good right now. And when you look at surveys, about 70% say that within the next 3 years, they think things will be better. In contrast, when Americans are asked that question, that's about 55%. We're more skeptical. Now, incidentally, they went through dilemmas economically the last years as we did, although they were not hit as hard. And maybe we'll talk about that. So, I have to say up front, I am bullish about Russia. And I'll share another provocative comment, which is buried somewhere in this PowerPoint. And I tell this to my students. And I'll be long gone, so I won't be able to tell you whether my forecast is true. But I tell you, in 100 years, when Russian children study their history, Vladimir Putin will be viewed as the 6th of their 6 greatest leaders. He is a major historical figure. Who were the 6? Who were the first 5? And they're people that we often didn't like. The West didn't like any of them at the time they governed. Ivan the Terrible, which is a terrible translation. It's really Ivan the Awe-inspiring. The word Grozny is awe-inspiring, formidable. There's the city in Chechnya, the capital is Grozny. It's not terrible. Well, they've been through terrible times, but it means formidable, awe-inspiring. Great leader. He was a great leader for Russia. Not a nice guy, but then nobody in the 16th century, I don't care where you go to England, France, none of them were nice. There's nothing to do with niceness governing these countries. So Ivan, I will call him the awe-inspiring. Peter the Great, who the Russians view as their greatest leader. Catherine the Great, glorious time in the late 18th century when Russia is really emerging as a great empire. Alexander II, they call him the liberator because he freed the serfs. At the time that Lincoln freed the slaves, they call Lincoln the emancipator, the emancipator. The liberator, the emancipator. They lived at the same time. Ironically, they both were assassinated. Very interesting similarities. There was a really interesting exhibit a couple of years ago, started in Russia, came to the United States, that was comparing Alexander II with Lincoln, the whole legacy. And you see, Russians do feel at times there are points of commonality in our countries, even if we've been adversaries. And then Stalin. Stalin, he was a great leader. Obviously, we know there were horrific realities about Stalin, but his system moved Russia to become a great power globally, and I'm saying that the 6th will be Putin. And in this regard, our view of Putin and their view of Putin could not be more different. But then the other leader, whose the judgment of the populations is so different, is Gorbachev, who Russians view overwhelmingly as the greatest failure. He was the worst leader they had in the last 100 years. And when you ask a Russian why, they would say, because he destroyed our great power. He was a weak leader. He was what they called the man of half measures. He allowed us to slide. And so he's viewed as a failure because for Russians, the greatest failing of a leader is not brutality. As you can see from my list, some of those leaders were rough. They were rough people, and even by the standards of their own times. The greatest failing is weakness. He was the greatest failure. So they would ask you, why do you think so well of Gorbachev? And they would, after you answer whatever you hear, democratization, perestroika, change, engagement, they would say, well, we know why you like him. You won the Cold War. You duped us. You did engage in NATO expansion. He worked out the kind of informal deal with the first Bush. You wouldn't go in as we left. And let's remember, they left Eastern Europe before the collapse of the Soviet Union. You went in, so you got everything out of that. You were great winners. He destroyed our country. Of course you like him. Of course you like Gorbachev. So this is somebody, I have to tell you, we listened to him recently. He was critical of President Putin, etc. He has his institute. They have offices in San Francisco, Moscow. You have to understand, from the Russian standpoint, they have little regard for him. He's considered, he's a failure. He was a failed leader. And consistently, when leaders are rated, he's at the bottom. Well, leaders of the last 100 years, he's consistently last. So you see, why am I stressing this? I wanted this slide too long. I'm stressing it because there is such a perceptual value divide. So I'm going to come to this. One of my students sent this to me the other day, and I put it right in there. It's Muscovites honor the Boston victims. You may not be able to read the picture. This is in front of the American Embassy. Someone has put in English, with flowers, a little tribute. The youth of Moscow grieves together with the American people. And when I saw this, my student just wanted, he's taking one of Russian politics class with me, wanted me to know this. I remember 9/11 and getting a call from my best friend and Moscow's wife that day. We're in Tucson, and he, and my best friend Alexei and his wife Ludmila, call her Mila, they'd been to Tucson. They knew we weren't in New York. They knew we weren't personally affected, but they just called. And I remember Mila calling me and said, Pat, We're all watching this on television. This is unbelievable. The children are crying. We're just so distraught. We called, first of all, we know you're safe. We're happy you're not in New York. But we want, please tell your neighbors and friends we are with you. We are the Russian people or the American people on this. This is a nightmare. Because we've been caught up in these problems. So you see, for many Russians, there is a solidarity with the American people. And I'm not surprised at this, that people would think that way, because they've been a victim of this very much. This was their 9/11. This was the event that really got their attention. You may remember this when the school was taken, a few years after 9/11. It was a nightmare. And I want to show you, I'm sorry, we're having breakfast, it's a beautiful day, but it was a terrible event. And I need to be a little graphic about it, because this rocked the Russians the way we were rocked by 9/11. Looking at those children, looking at the carnage. Then it's something like this. I'm sorry, it's gruesome, but let's get real. Let's get real. This is what they dealt with. Probably the head down there of a terrorist. I don't think they're worried about that. But how many limbs are their own children? This is what worked the Russians up, and Putin came forward with a very decisive reaction. If we want to start to understand why is Putin well regarded, let's go back to this. Because Putin came to power as a prime minister, 6 months before Yeltsin surprised the world by retiring. And he took on this problem, and the Russians saw him as very forceful, very principled. We didn't like what he was doing. We saw it as genocidal. But the Russian view was, you know what, we're going to deal with this terrorism however we must. Now, this is a couple of years later. Here is now the site of the school, the Tree of Grief, an exhibit inside the pictures of all those that died. This was a riveting moment, but I want to tie this to Putin, because you see, from the Russian standpoint, they liked his strength. Where Yeltsin couldn't handle this for 5, 6, 7 years. And they were in a stalemate. Imagine it, a superpower in a stalemate with a bunch of rebels in a breakaway region. This guy comes in and, pardon me, kicks some butt. And they liked it. They liked it. And so this is very much at the heart of his standing, in the sense that he is seen as strong and resolute. Now, one other thing on Putin before where am I going? Oh yeah, let me get this in real. There's Grozny, just to tell you, there's the capital city of Chechnya. There it is, the first picture up here. This is before the fighting. You can see it's a bombed out city of about 800,000. Here it is today. Here it is, it's back, it's thriving. Now, this isn't an accident. It's been tough history. There's the guy in charge, Ramzan Kadyrov. His father was leader, he was assassinated. He came in, this is no sweetie. I think holding the gun is a nice picture. This guy is one hard character, and we accuse him of war crimes, etc. And fittingly, there's a picture of Vladimir Putin in the background, because the Russians back him. But what I want to note here is, from the Russian standpoint, they're very happy about the situation. It's quiescent, things are relatively under control, the region's coming back, it's flourishing economically. They basically routed the rebels. On the other hand, we have been somewhat critical, but our criticism became mute, especially after 9/11, because frankly, sometimes tough things are done when you're dealing with terrorism. So at this point, from a Russian standpoint, this is good news. But we've had our misgivings, and some of them do surround him, because he's not a nice guy. And I would predict to you he will not die sleeping in his bed. At some point he will be killed. I mean, he's going to get killed. These are blood feuds. These are clans. There's been fighting. You can read short stories by Tolstoy about this fighting. This isn't about Soviet power, 21st century Russian power. This is a long-standing Wild West in the Russian-style region. And Tolstoy wrote about this back in the late 19th, early 20th century. So this is a tough area. But you see, from the Russian standpoint, they like the way this government reacted to this, and they're not shedding any tears over the fact that Kadyrov is frankly rather rough when it comes to dealing with opponents. Now let me say one other thing about Putin, and I'll come back to him because he's a central player. This, to me, was an interesting statement that he made when he was running for president back in 2000, a couple of weeks before he was elected. He was interviewed, and he was asked, what do you think about the Soviet Union? How should the Russian people think about the Soviet Union, the Soviet past? And he made the following comment. He said, he's speaking about the Russian people, anyone who doesn't miss and regret the collapse of the Soviet Union does not have a heart. Anyone who wants the Soviet Union back does not have a brain. Now, when I share this, like in class, if I don't set this up and say, this is to the Russian audience, they say, what the heck, why would it? But you see, from their standpoint, Soviet power brought many great things to the Russian people. And Russians now, of my age, a little younger, a little older, they miss much about the Soviet Union. And having lived there at that time, I understand completely why. There were many aspects of Soviet power which were quite nice. And they contrast with what is going on now in that there are things now that they really like, but there are things they miss. Maybe the way that we might miss the 50s. There's things we don't want, I don't want to go back to. But on the other hand, there was maybe the logic of a quiet, a stability, etc. The rush of change, all of that we have a maudlin sense of an earlier time. And they feel that as well. And so, to me, I share that comment of Putin because I think what's made Putin such an amazing politician, whether you like him or not, but why he will be a great leader in the Russian estimate, and he's still got some time, is he's had his hand on the pulse of Russians. You see, he comes from ordinary background, and he really gets average Russians. And in that regard, I notice with my Russian friends, and another slide in here we'll get to, Putin fatigue, no doubt about it, no doubt about it. Hell, he's been a leader for 13 years, either president or prime minister, but paramount leader. He's been the paramount leader for 13 years. Of course there's Putin fatigue, no doubt about it. But on the other hand, there just was nobody else from their standpoint. I think in the end, the reason that one of the reasons he's held on is not so much, this notion of coercion, the state. I think it's really been, he really has his hand on the pulse of that country. And that comment I just shared with you is a nice example. Here's a question for you. Here's a question for you. Survey a week ago. Russians were asked. This is about an 1,800 person sample. It's a good survey. Do you want President Putin re-elected in 2018, which is when his term will be up? It's now a 6-year term. So he would be up for re-election. Do you want President Putin re-elected in 2018? What percentage of the respondents said yes? 70, 80. What? 100? Boy, that's love. How about 22%? 22%. 55% said no. They do not want him re-elected. And the remaining 23% have got to sort it out. Many of them, they'll split. So figure split. So figure about 2/3 say no. Because the truth of the matter is, at that point, it will have been 18 years. He's got it. I got to tell you something. He's got his hands full. This notion that he just calls the shots like Stalin is complete nonsense. And when I watched Russian television coverage of his inauguration, and we got Dish Network, and I get a couple of stations from Russia, the commentators were talking about this. Of course, it was a positive assessment overall, but they said, you know what, he's got about 2 years to get a handle on some of these problems, or he's going to lose this population. I couldn't believe I'm hearing this on Russian television. Yeah. This notion that, we can't criticize, but I got some goodies in here. Hang in there, people. I got some cute goodies in here for you. This notion that you can't criticize Putin, give me a break. I live in the Soviet Union. You can criticize Putin. Okay, let's move on here. Okay, I want to get to the rub. Okay, I'm going right to where you're going to have questions. I'm front-loading this baby. Incidentally, my style is I'll take your questions, but then I will try to gently at some point keep us rolling because I want to get through my program. But I don't also want you to feel like if you're just, you're about ready to blow, I'm making a comment and you're maybe frustrated or please raise your hand. I'll take the question and we'll just keep moving. So let's just go right now to 3 big issues on the agenda that we're all talking about. And I'm going to give you a different view than you're hearing in the media. Let's start with this one. The law passed, signed by President Putin against Americans adopting Russians. Let me give you the Russian view. Of course, first of all, they were not happy about some of the legislation that we put in place that pinpoints not only them as a country, but some of their citizens that they can't come to Russia, etc. They were angry in part because, let's face it, China is an authoritarian country. China does things on a whole other level than Russia. And they felt they were picked on, and as Medvedev said in one of the interviews I saw from Davos, you do not pass laws that literally are targeted towards individuals. And that's what the Americans are doing. They're picking on us X, Y, Z. Of course, they lay at the feet of the regime every problem there, as if Putin killed every person that ever died there, this kind of deal. So we have that background. Let's go to this. Here's what's happening. Unfortunately, Among the tens of thousands of children that we have adopted, and I have a colleague who adopted a Russian child, and she's doing beautifully. She's about 17 now. Unfortunately, there have been several dozen cases at least that have been nightmarish. Nightmarish, and the Russians know about them. They play out the way that I'm sure for us when there's some event that happens that involves an American child in Brazil or somewhere else, and maybe there's many, many thousands of Americans, but we have that one, we hear about it, we get worked up, but there have been a couple of dozen. Whether we're talking about the child that was adopted, left in a car in Virginia that suffocated to death in the heat, or we talk about the case that I came across when I was watching the Today Show one morning, it was about a year ago, the Tennessee family, the single mother with her mother, they'd had it with a little kid, I don't know, it was incorrigible, whatever, they just put him on a plane and sent him back to Russia. Now this one got a lot of attention. They put him on the plane and they sent him back as if he were trash. There was no one at the other end. They didn't send him to grandma. They just sent him. We don't want him. You take him. You can imagine how that played out. And there have been about 24 cases like this, unfortunately. Now we had one about a month ago. This is after the law. We had a teenage kid in Philadelphia. I don't know the story. And again, I'm giving you what I read and hear. There may be two sides to this. But I'm telling you what the Russians hear. This kid ended up running away from home. This is his story. He ran away from home. He's in a halfway house in Philly. He claims that the parents that adopted, they knew where he was. He met with them. There were a lot of problems with him. They basically left him there. So he was able to come up. I don't know, he went to the Russian council, wherever. He came out. He went home. He flew home. And he's on doing national media talk shows, etc. I was abused. I was a street person. They didn't care. And now I'm back, and I do have, he has distant relatives, they're taking care of him. So the problem is this. We've had several dozen of these cases. There is a general sense that we have disdain for Russia. That in many ways we are just the latest Western country, following the French and the British and the Germans that have looked down at Russians as, pardon me, a trash people, as the Nazis called them, Slavs as trash. And that's the way it comes off to them. And so there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of anger. And so this law was really about Americans. We are not sharing our precious treasures with you. We know not all of you do this, but there are just too many cases. So I'm just giving you the Russian view. This wasn't about Putin just playing games. What I'm telling you is the Russian people, in their own unctuous outrage, strongly wanted this. So I know this goes against the grain that, their people are oppressed, but this is a mean government. What you need to know here is this is a popular, well-supported policy. Now, yes, you will see on television demonstrations, 100 people gathering in Moscow protesting this. I'm talking about the mainstream. I'm talking about the mainstream. 20% of the population really hates Putin. The other 80% are somewhere else, from neutral to positive. So yes, I know there are demonstrations about that law, but this is a very small minority. Okay, how about this one? This is a real interesting one. The Pussy Riot and the repression of civil liberties. The picture below in the church. Now let me give you a Russian view. Maybe you saw that. Did anybody see the 60 Minutes piece on this 2 weeks ago? Oh God, I taped it. I mean, we did a full analysis. I thought, we're going to watch this baby. Watch the way they set this thing up. What an interesting misreading from my standpoint. All right, if you don't know, what happened is this. We had a young group of Russian women protesters. They call themselves feminists, but I don't know exactly how they're championing women's rights, so I don't like to use the word feminist. But they're a young group. They don't like Putin. They feel the country's repressive. They went into Christ the Cathedral Church in Moscow, and they basically performed, as you see, they're kind of dressed, well, you may not be able to see well, but they've got masks on, and they got up on the altar, they're dancing around. Now, fortunately, they didn't urinate or throw feces. It could have been worse, but they desecrated. They desecrated the inner sanctum of the church. If you were watching on 60 Minutes, you saw a little footage. When you saw them being shoved out, those weren't police, those were nuns. Those were the employees of the church who got them out of there after they did their, 2-minute desecration. Now, what's important to note is 60 Minutes, you see, the problem with 60 Minutes was not what they said, it's what they left out. All the context, so much important context was missing. So let me point out this. First of all, this was the seat of the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church. This is going to the Vatican, and we're going to desecrate the Sistine Chapel. We want to go to the most high-profile places. We want to get your attention. That's the first, never noted that they went into a church. Go back and watch it. They went into a church. It wasn't just a church. They went into like the Vatican and the Sistine Chapel for Russians. Second, the attack wasn't against Putin. It was against the patriarch of the church. Because what they reacted to in part was the patriarch came out and made this comment. God sent Putin to help Russia restore itself. And they were outraged at the church. They were outraged at the way the church is aligning with the state. Now, again, we presented it on like 60 Minutes. This was an attack on Putin. Yes, it was. But it was also an attack on the church. Now, what happened, interestingly, was this was all over in 5 minutes. The police were never there. What happened is the group put it on the internet. It went viral. And it was 2 weeks later when they got arrested. Because this was raising hell. And again, what I would say to you is, the Russian population overwhelmingly supported their arrest and their prosecution. Now, I would discuss this in my classes. Bring this up, and some of the students, especially if we watched, you can go online and watch the videos out there. You can watch the Pussy Riot, 3-minute incident. You judge for yourself when you think about it. But I show that in class. I, ask my students, what do you think about this? And their reaction, once they watched it, was, that is disgusting. But I think 2 years in prison is a little long. So we have a discussion. How much time? How much punishment? And that's a judgment call. But I would say to them, let me give you a Russian reaction to you as you're telling me how tough they are. How about the fact you have a death penalty? How about the fact that you put to death children in the United States? You put to death people that have, shall we say, intellectual issues. They're limited mentality, limited intelligence. They don't do that. You do it. So isn't that interesting? They would say you're rough. You're rough with your punishment. So this is a judgment call. But I have to tell you, overall, my students agreed when they saw that, that was disgusting. And they could begin to see why Russian people would not like this. Again, this is what the Russian people wanted. This wasn't a Stalinist government repressing civil liberties from their standpoint. You don't have a right to desecrate a church and then brag about it. Third, this one. There's some Syrians, probably in Damascus. Thanks, Russia. Now I'm going to give you another view. And as I turn to Syria briefly, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to give you a Russian angle. I'm going to give you a different angle than what we're getting. As I start, let me say my colleague Fatin Goshen, who was here last year, says hi. She had a great time. Loved meeting you people. You were very gracious to her. Maybe she'll come back again. She's still smart as hell and just as lively. And I talked to her about this, so she informs me about this because I'm not a specialist. And you who met her know she's from Lebanon, she's Druze. But she's very dispassionate in her analysis. She's quite knowledgeable about Israel. She can offer very, very incisive insight on Israel. She's not one of these people that has to take one side. In any case, we talked about this. Now let me give you the Russian view. I'm going to tie it in with what she shared with me. This is a very complicated domestic conflict going on in Syria. I have to be honest with you, in the fighting going on, there's no nice people. Well, President Obama, who I frankly I'm with Democrats, but I am a Democrat and I happen to like President Obama, but I will admit that he's a human being and not every policy is necessarily one that I agree with. This is a statement I regretted when he said, well, we know that if anyone uses weapons of mass terror, if they use like chemical or weapons, it'll be the government. I think he's completely wrong. I think it's more likely the rebels will use them. I think it's completely the opposite. So I fundamentally disagree. I'm not an expert in the area, but I talked to Goshen, I talked to others, and the people that I respect who are more dispassionate, who don't have access to crime, will tell you, the rebels are not nice. They're rough. So first of all, from a human rights standpoint, the Russians are shedding crocodile tears. They would say the Western, let me rephrase it. They would say that looking at us, we are shedding crocodile tears. This is about American power and Western power. Get them out, we get in. So we've already done that in Iraq, they would argue. We have displaced them with ourselves. And Halliburton's in there and all that good stuff, and their contracts are gone. So Iraq, then Libya, we went in there. We displaced them, and now this is the last one. And they will be damned, pardon me, if they're going to let that happen. So we have that issue from a great power standpoint. They don't buy this human rights stuff. This is just nonsense. Now we go to the human rights stuff. So I'm going to share with you what she shared with me, Fat, and some others. The truth of the matter is the government's not nice. I'm not going to be here to promote Assad's government. I'm not going to tell you it's worse than the rebels. So for instance, you may or may not be aware